The floorboards groaned under Elias. He shifted his stance, redistributing the ache in his knees, and stood still in the doorway of the cramped bedroom. Dawn remained trapped behind the city skyline. Pale amber light spilled from the street lamps outside, cutting sharp angles across the peeling linoleum. In the center of the room, on a mattress pulled directly onto the floor, lay Lily. 5 years old today. She breathed in a slow, rhythmic cadence, one small arm draped over a threadbare rabbit missing its left ear. Elias looked down at his own hands. They were tools, instruments forged by necessity and worn down by endless hours under the hoods of dying sedans and freight trucks. Grease stained the deep creases of his knuckles. Thick calluses patted his palms, mapping a life he never planned but accepted without a single complaint. He clenched his fists. The joints popped. A dull, heavy throb radiated up his forearms. He turned away from the door and walked into the narrow kitchen. 3 envelopes rested on the chipped Formica counter. Past due, final notice. He swept them into a drawer out of sight. Not today. Today belonged to her. Elias reached up to the highest cabinet and pulled down a rusted Maxwell House coffee tin. It felt heavier than usual. He pried the plastic lid off. Inside rested crumpled single-dollar bills. Handfuls of quarters, dimes, a few silver half-dollars he found while cleaning out a wrecked Buick. He dumped the contents onto the table. The coins clattered, a harsh metallic sound echoing in the quiet apartment. He began to stack them. $1, $2, $5, $10. For 6 long months, every meager tip, every spool of recycled copper wire, every skipped lunch pooled into this tin. He counted the crumpled paper. He straightened the bent edges, pressing George Washington's face flat against the table with his heavy thumb. $68.40. Enough. Elias walked over to the mudroom by the front door. His work boots sat crooked on the mat. The leather on the right toe had peeled back, exposing the steel cap underneath. He picked up a roll of black duct tape. He ripped a strip with his teeth and bound the toe, sealing the gap against the biting autumn chill. He strapped the boots on. They anchored him to the floor like concrete blocks. He grabbed his jacket, faded denim frayed at the collar. He caught his reflection in the scratched mirror hanging by the door. Deep shadows pooled under his eyes. Gray strands threaded through his dark hair, appearing a decade before their time. He looked tired. He looked like a man carrying a mountain on his back. A soft rustle from the bedroom broke the silence. The exhaustion drained from his face instantly. "Daddy?" Her voice floated through the hallway. Sleep-heavy, innocent, unburdened. Elias stepped back into the room. He knelt beside the mattress. The smell of cheap baby shampoo and warm cotton enveloped him. "I'm here, Bug," he whispered. Lily rubbed her eyes, blinking away the sleep. "Is the sun awake yet?" "Almost." He reached out to brush a stray curl from her forehead. His rough thumb caught slightly on her delicate skin. He pulled his hand back quickly, mindful of the calluses. "Happy birthday, Lily." A bright smile broke across her face, missing one bottom tooth. It outshone the amber street lights, pushing through the blinds. "Do I get a pancake?" she asked, sitting up. "Better," Elias said, his voice steady and low. "Tonight we wear our good clothes. We go somewhere nice, somewhere with glass cups and cloth napkins. Just you and me." Lily's eyes widened. "Like a princess." "Exactly like a princess." He stood up. The dull throb in his knees returned sharper this time. He ignored it. He packed her lunch for daycare. 2 slices of generic white bread, a thin layer of peanut butter. He meticulously cut off the crusts. He placed a small note inside the brown paper bag, a hastily drawn, smiley face. The world outside this apartment demanded tribute every single day. It extracted sweat, pride, and time. Society looked past him. Wealthy customers tossed car keys at his chest without making eye contact. Cashiers tapped their pristine nails impatiently while he counted exact change. He absorbed it all, a silent sponge soaking up the indignities of a city that deemed him invisible. He swallowed his pride daily, a bitter pill that kept the electricity running and the radiator humming. He hoisted Lily onto his shoulders. She giggled, grabbing handfuls of his collar. "Giddy up," she commanded. Elias pushed the front door open. The morning air bit at his exposed neck. He stepped out into the concrete maze. He carried her weight effortlessly. It was the only weight he never wanted to put down. Tonight, he would give her the world, even if he had to rent a small piece of it for just 1 hour. The brass handles of Laura felt heavy, forged from polished metal meant to keep a specific world outside. Elias gripped the cool brass. He pulled the heavy glass door open. A wall of warm, lavender-scented air washed over them. Soft jazz drifted through the dining room, a low, rhythmic bass line hiding beneath the clinking of fine silver. Crystal chandeliers hung suspended from the ceiling, like frozen constellations. Lily squeezed his fingers. Her thrift store tool dress rustled with every step. She wore a plastic silver tiara nestled in her curls. To her, they were crossing the threshold of a grand castle. Elias wore a navy button-down shirt. He had ironed the collar twice that afternoon, pressing the worn fabric flat against the ironing board. Yet the cotton still held the memory of countless industrial wash cycles. His work boots, scrubbed clean with an old toothbrush, carried the faint, indelible ghost of motor oil. He stood tall, a quiet shield built between his daughter and the blinding gold of the room. A hostess in a tailored black blazer approached the podium. Her professional smile did not reach her eyes. Her gaze dropped to Elias's boots. It drifted up to the slight fraying at his cuffs. A silent calculation, a swift, brutal categorization. "Reservation?" she asked. The word lacked any warmth. Elias gave his name. He kept his voice even. The hostess tapped a sleek tablet. A microscopic sigh escaped her painted lips. She gathered 2 oversized leather menus. "Follow me." She guided them past sweeping velvet booths, past tables draped in blinding heavy white linen. Wealth murmured in the air around them. Men wore bespoke suits worth more than Elias's annual rent. Women displayed diamonds that caught and fractured the chandelier light. They bypassed the grand bay windows overlooking the glittering avenue. They walked past the prime seating in the center of the room. The hostess did not stop. She led them to the very back. A small, wobbly 2-seater tucked flush against the swinging wooden doors of the kitchen. A draft of cold air seeped from the service hallway every time a waiter pushed through. The Siberia of the dining room. Elias pulled the heavy wooden chair out for Lily. He did not argue. He did not demand a better view or complain about the draft. He swallowed the dry, bitter taste of exclusion and sat down. He opened the menu. The thick parchment paper felt foreign against his calluses. There were no dollar signs printed next to the items, just raw numbers sitting beside elaborate French descriptions. 32, 48, 65. He mapped out the $68 resting in his pocket. He mentally subtracted the city tax. He factored in the gratuity. He needed to leave a good tip. Poor men always left good tips to prove that they had a right to occupy the chair. "Daddy, look," Lily whispered. She reached out and traced the edge of the silver butter knife. "It's so shiny." A waiter materialized beside them, a crisp white apron wrapped around his waist. He stood with an impatient, rigid posture. Elias ordered the herb-roasted chicken for Lily, a tall glass of whole milk. "And for you, sir?" the waiter asked, his pen hovering over a small notepad. "Just a black coffee," Elias said. The waiter paused. He raised a single groomed eyebrow. A heavy judgment hung suspended in the space between them. "Just coffee?" "I had a late lunch," Elias lied. His stomach tightened, a hollow drum echoing against his ribs. He had not eaten since a piece of toast at dawn. The waiter gathered the menus and vanished without another word. The table directly to their left sat too close. A man in a tailored gray suit swirled amber liquid in a crystal tumbler. The woman across from him wore a string of pearls resting on her collarbone. She glanced over at Lily. She stared at the plastic tiara. Her nose crinkled. She executed a microscopic shift in posture, leaning her chair an inch away, as if poverty were an airborne disease. Elias tracked her movement. His jaw locked. The muscles in his neck strained against his collar. He forced his rough hands to remain flat on the white tablecloth. He breathed in, slow, deep. He would not let their disdain pierce this hour. He looked back at Lily. She sat kicking her legs beneath the table, humming a cartoon theme song. She remained entirely oblivious to the silent war of social class waging inches from her face. Her joy was a fragile, shimmering glass ornament. Elias built a fortress around it with his own restraint. He watched the awe in her eyes as she stared at the ceiling. For tonight, he would absorb every sneer. He would carry every judgmental glance. As long as she felt like a princess, he would gladly play the peasant in the corner. Eleanor Sterling anchored the center of the room. Her sapphire velvet booth commanded a sweeping view of the avenue. She rested her temple against two manicured fingers. A tablet sat beside an untouched glass of Chardonnay. Red arrows plunging downward, endless emails demanding her attention. She turned the screen off. Her reflection stared back, a woman who owned half the commercial real estate in the district, yet housed a hollow ache in her chest. She closed her eyes. The soft jazz grated on her nerves. Every conversation she endured lately was a transaction. Every polite smile concealed a hidden agenda. She craved genuine, unscripted silence. Across the restaurant, the drafty kitchen door swung open. A waiter approached Elias's table, dropping the black coffee onto the saucer. The porcelain clattered. Dark liquid sloshed over the rim, staining the pristine white cloth. Elias reached for a napkin to dab the spill. He broke eye contact with his daughter for 5 seconds. Just 5 fleeting seconds. Lily slipped from her wooden chair. Her threadbare rabbit dangled from her grip. The restaurant stretched out before her, a glowing maze of shiny things. She navigated the labyrinth of tailored suits, completely invisible to the giants talking above her head. She gravitated toward the brightest spot in the room. The crystal chandelier above Eleanor's booth cast a golden halo over the velvet. Eleanor opened her eyes. A small figure blocked her view of the rain-slicked street. She blinked her mind, struggling to process the intrusion. A little girl stood beside the table. Tulle dress, plastic tiara, a stuffed animal missing an ear. Eleanor stiffened. Children did not belong in her orbit. Her reality consisted of boardrooms, hostile takeovers, and calculated risks. This was an unpredictable variable. Lily tilted her head. She examined Eleanor with wide, unblinking eyes. She did not see a ruthless executive. She saw a solitary lady sitting in a very big, very empty space. "You look sad," Lily stated. A simple, piercing observation that sliced straight through the ambient noise. Eleanor froze. The invisible armor she wore every single day cracked down the center. No one spoke to her with such blunt clarity. Her subordinates cowered. Her rivals sneered or flattered. This child merely observed the truth. "Excuse me," Eleanor managed to say. Her tone felt rusty, entirely stripped of its usual commanding edge. Lily stepped closer. The rabbit dragged across the polished hardwood floor. "My daddy says when people sit all by themselves, they get the gray clouds." Lily pointed a tiny dimpled finger at the empty expanse of velvet across from Eleanor. "Can I sit with you?" The question hung in the air. A foreign language. Eleanor scanned the surrounding tables, expecting an exasperated nanny or a frantic mother to rush over and snatch the child away. Nothing, just the low hum of the dining room. She looked back at the girl. The plastic tiara caught the chandelier's light. The missing bottom tooth. The complete, profound lack of fear. Eleanor could summon the maitre d'. She could wave the child away with a dismissive flick of her wrist. Instead, an unfamiliar warmth sparked in her chest. A quiet, strange defiance against her own rigid rules. She shifted her posture. She tapped the velvet cushion beside her. "You may," Eleanor said. Lily scrambled up. the tulle dress bunched around her waist. She slammed the worn rabbit onto the mahogany table. It sat right next to the crystal wine glass, a stark collision of two entirely different universes. Across the room, Elias crumpled the damp napkin. He looked up. The chair opposite him sat empty. Ice flooded his veins. The air vanished from his lungs. He stood up, knocking the wooden chair back. It scraped loudly against the floor. Heads turned. Disdainful glares locked onto him. He ignored them. His eyes scanned the room, hunting for the glint of a silver tiara. He found her, sitting in the VIP section, across from a woman draped in dark designer silk. A woman whose posture radiated pure, unapproachable authority. Elias's stomach dropped. The elite did not tolerate intrusions. He knew the strict rules of this world. He was the trespasser, and his daughter had just breached the highest wall. He wove through the tables. His heavy boots thumped a frantic, uneven rhythm against the hardwood. He prepared his apologies. He tasted the familiar ash of humiliation on his tongue. He would bow his head. He would scoop his daughter up and retreat back to the shadows near the kitchen. Eleanor watched the man approach. She noticed the panic in his dark eyes. She noted the frayed collar, the defensive slump of his shoulders, the grease stains deeply embedded in his knuckles. But beneath the worn exterior, she saw the raw, unfiltered terror of a parent desperate to protect his child. "Lily," Elias breathed out, reaching the table. His voice trembled a low, gravelly whisper. "You can't bother people, Bug. We have to go back." Lily frowned. "But she had the gray clouds, Daddy." Eleanor met Elias's gaze. The hostility he braced for never came. Instead, she offered a slow, deliberate nod, a silent acknowledgement of his presence. A shadow eclipsed the soft glow of the chandelier. Elias did not need to turn around to know who stood behind him. He felt the sharp drop in temperature. He smelled the heavy, oppressive scent of expensive cedar cologne, masking the scent of roasted herbs. Bastian, the floor manager, materialized at the edge of the velvet booth. He wore a charcoal suit tailored so precisely it appeared to restrict his breathing. His posture mirrored a drawn bowstring, rigid and vibrating with suppressed irritation. He did not address Eleanor. He directed his gaze entirely at Elias. A gaze practiced in stripping away a man's dignity layer by thin layer. "Sir," Bastian began. His voice barely rose above a whisper. It slithered beneath the jazz music, coated in an artificial cloying politeness. "I must ask you to collect your child and return to your designated seating area." Elias nodded. He kept his eyes lowered, staring at the intricate floral pattern woven into the expensive carpet. "I apologize. She slipped away while I was cleaning a spill. We are going back right now." He reached for Lily's hand. She pulled away, burying her small fingers deeper into the thick velvet cushion beside Eleanor. "I'm talking to the lady Daddy," Lily protested. Her voice carried the bright, unblemished clarity of youth. She remained entirely blind to the social execution taking place right above her head. She only saw a new friend. Bastian's lip curled, a microscopic sneer that communicated volumes. He stepped an inch closer, invading Elias's personal space. "We strive to maintain a certain standard of ambiance," said Laura. The manager continued pitching his voice so only the three adults could hear. He let his eyes drop, deliberately mapping the frayed hem of Elias's denim jacket. His stare lingered on the embedded engine grease outlining Elias's cuticles. "Our guests pay for exclusivity and peace. They do not pay to be solicited by individuals who wander away from the service corridor." The words hung suspended in the warm air, poison disguised as establishment policy. At the adjacent table, the man swirling the amber liquor paused mid-rotation. The woman with the pearls rested her silver fork against her china plate. The surrounding patrons transformed into a captive audience. They watched the spectacle unfold in silence. A working-class man being reminded of his boundaries. A twisted, quiet theater of hierarchy. Elias's jaw locked. the muscles in his neck strained, forming thick cords beneath his weathered skin. A primal protective instinct flared deep in his chest, hot and blinding. His hands, forged by iron-raw copper and heavy machinery, curled into fists at his sides. He knew exactly how much physical force it took to shatter a rusted steering column. He knew how easily he could reach out, grip the lapels of that charcoal suit, and snap the arrogance straight out of the manager's rigid spine. He tasted copper, the metallic tang of adrenaline flooding his mouth. He took a slow breath. He forced the air down into his tight lungs. He looked at the plastic silver tiara resting crookedly on his daughter's curls. One swing, one solitary loss of control. That was all it took. The police would arrive. Social services would hover with their clipboards and judgment. The system always favored the tailored suit over the worn denim. If he struck this man, he forfeited his right to protect his daughter. So Elias built a tomb inside his chest. He buried his pride. He shoveled dirt over his own dignity. He relaxed his fists, forcing his bruised knuckles to uncurl one by one. He absorbed the humiliation, drawing the venom into his own veins so it would not touch her. "It won't happen again," Elias said. The words scraped against his throat like swallowed glass. His voice carried the heavy, defeated cadence of a man surrendering his last shield. Bastian offered a curt, dismissive nod, a monarch accepting the total surrender of a trespassing peasant. He turned his head and signaled to a passing busboy. He gestured toward the spot on the mahogany table where Lily's stuffed rabbit sat. "Wipe this section down," Bastian instructed the boy. "Sterilize the surface." Elias flinched. The insult landed with the crushing weight of a physical blow to the ribs. He reached over the table, keeping his eyes averted from Eleanor, and gathered the worn rabbit. He scooped Lily into his arms. She squirmed, confused by the rigid, trembling tension radiating from his chest. "But, Daddy, her gray clouds," Lily murmured, resting her chin on his broad shoulder, reaching a hand back toward the velvet booth. "We're leaving the lady alone, Lily," Elias whispered into her hair. He kept his head bowed. He prepared to carry his daughter back through the gauntlet of staring eyes, back to the drafty table hidden by the kitchen door. He accepted his defeat, the invisible man retreating back to the shadows. Elias pivoted the worn rubber of his right boot, catching slightly on the polished hardwood. He tucked Lily's head beneath his chin, shielding her eyes from the stares of the dining room. He took one step toward the shadowy corridor. "Stop!" The word did not echo. It did not boom. It sliced through the ambient jazz like a silver scalpel severing a nerve. Elias froze. The busboy, hovering with a damp white towel, turned into a statue. Bastian, the floor manager, snapped his attention back to the sapphire velvet booth. Eleanor Sterling had not raised her voice. She simply uncrossed her legs, planted her designer heels flat against the floor, and folded her hands on the mahogany table. She pinned Bastian beneath a gaze forged in hostile corporate takeovers, a stare that routinely dismantled men with egos twice the size of this dining room. "Ma'am," Bastian inquired. His artificial smile wavered, the edges curling inward. "Is there a problem with your wine?" "The wine is adequate," Eleanor replied. She maintained eye contact, unblinking, unforgiving. The service, however, has crossed into the realm of the offensive. Bastian smoothed his tie, a nervous flutter of his manicured fingers. "I apologize if the disturbance upset you. We are removing the—" "You are removing my guests," Eleanor interrupted. Her tone carried the chill of a high-altitude wind. A suffocating silence blanketed the surrounding tables. The clinking of fine silver ceased entirely. The man swirling the amber liquor set his glass down. The theater of hierarchy had flipped its script, and the audience held its breath. Bastian swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed above his crisp white collar. "Your guests, ma'am. I was under the impression they were lingering from the service area." Eleanor shifted her gaze to the busboy. "Put the towel away." The boy scrambled backward, hiding the cloth behind his back. Eleanor returned her attention to Bastian. She studied his name tag. She read the desperation seeping through his pores. Small men wielding microscopic power always panicked when confronted by genuine authority. "I invited the young lady to sit," Eleanor stated, enunciating each syllable with lethal precision. "Her father was coming to join us. You, Bastian, interrupted a private engagement to enforce a dress code policy that exists solely in your own prejudiced imagination. You embarrassed a patron. You insulted a child." Bastian's charcoal suit seemed to swallow him whole. The rigid bowstring of his posture snapped. He shrank under the weight of her reprimand. He recognized the tone. It belonged to the tax bracket that kept the restaurant's doors open. I was unaware," he stammered, the cloying politeness entirely stripped from his voice. "My deepest apologies. Truly." Eleanor dismissed him with a microscopic flick of her wrist. "Bring a proper chair for the child. Bring another menu. And send our original waiter to take their order. Now." Bastian bowed his head, a disgraced courtier retreating from the throne. He scurried toward the kitchen, his polished shoes clicking a frantic retreat against the floorboards. The busboy vanished into the shadows behind him. The surrounding patrons averted their eyes, pretending to study their plates or their empty glasses. The spectacle ended. The tension dissolved, leaving behind a heavy, vibrating quiet. Elias stood rooted to the floor. His lungs burned. He exhaled a breath he did not realize he was holding. He turned slowly, expecting a trap, a cruel joke orchestrated for the amusement of the wealthy. He looked at Eleanor. She did not offer a pitying smile. She did not radiate the smug satisfaction of a savior. She simply gestured to the empty space on the sapphire velvet. "The seat is still open," she said softly. The ice had melted from her voice, leaving a quiet, genuine invitation. Elias hesitated. The protective tomb inside his chest fought against the logic of the situation. His pride warned him to walk away. His survival instincts demanded he retreat to the drafty table by the kitchen. But he felt Lily squirming in his arms, her eyes fixed on the empty spot next to the lady with the gray clouds. He stepped back to the table. He did not sit immediately. He studied Eleanor, searching for the hidden catch. He found only a weary, solitary woman staring back at him. Their eyes met, a silent, profound collision. Eleanor saw the bruised knuckles, the frayed denim, and the deep reservoir of quiet endurance beneath his dark eyes. Elias saw the silk, the diamonds, and the hollow ache she tried to hide behind her armor. Two distinct fortresses built on opposite sides of the world, recognizing the exact same loneliness in each other. Elias gently set Lily down onto the velvet cushion. He pulled out the heavy wooden chair opposite Eleanor and finally took his seat. The barrier was broken. The original waiter materialized beside the sapphire booth. His hands carried a visible tremor as he set a fresh, steaming cup of dark roast before Elias. He poured Lily a tall glass of milk, bowing his head in a silent, rehearsed apology, before retreating into the woodwork. Eleanor watched Elias. He did not reach for the coffee. He focused entirely on his daughter. He took the heavy silver knife and fork. His thick, oil-stained fingers dwarfed the delicate utensils. He cut the roasted chicken into perfect, symmetrical squares. Precision, focus. A man accustomed to fixing broken things, ensuring every fractured piece fit perfectly back together. "You don't belong in this corner," Eleanor said. The observation held no malice, just cold clinical fact. Elias set the knife down. He met her gaze across the mahogany table. "Neither do you." A microscopic smirk touched the corner of Eleanor's mouth. The first genuine expression she had worn all evening. "I own the building, Elias." "Ownership doesn't equate to belonging," he replied. His voice remained a low, steady rumble, unaffected by her wealth. "You bought the chair. You didn't buy the piece to sit in it." Eleanor froze. The crystal stem of her wine glass grew warm against her fingers. Men in tailored suits spent hours pitching her multi-million-dollar deals, hiding behind a thick fog of hollow corporate jargon. This man, wearing work boots held together by duct tape, dissected her entire existence in 2 sentences. She turned 5 today. Elias continued wiping a stray breadcrumb from Lily's chin. A milestone. Eleanor looked at the plastic tiara. And you chose Laura. I chose a memory, Elias corrected, leaning back slightly. Clothes wear out, toys lose their parts. But she will remember the chandelier. She will remember the jazz. I deal in permanent fixtures. Eleanor felt a distinct physical shift in her rib cage, a quiet cracking of her long-held armor. She studied the map of calluses on Elias's hands. She recognized the architecture of exhaustion. She knew the crushing weight of carrying a world on one's back, even if their worlds existed in parallel, untouched dimensions. Behind the grease and the faded denim sat a sharp, undeniable intellect. They shared the space in a rare, untethered quiet. Lily hummed eating her chicken, swinging her legs off the edge of the velvet cushion. For 40 minutes, the dining room faded into meaningless background noise, a fleeting suspension of reality. The waiter returned with a black leather ledger. He placed it equidistant between the 2 adults. Eleanor reached for the bill. Elias moved faster. His heavy hand pinned the leather to the wood. I invited you, Eleanor stated, a hint of her boardroom authority creeping back into her tone. And I accepted the seat, Elias countered. Not the charity. He opened the ledger. He reached into his denim jacket. He withdrew the crushed single-dollar bills, the handfuls of quarters and dimes. He stacked them on the fine white tablecloth. He did not rush. He did not lower his eyes in shame. He counted out the exact price of the chicken, the milk, the coffee, and a calculated, generous tip. The metallic clink of coins sounded like small anchors dropping into the quiet room. He placed his pride on the table, tangible and undeniably earned. Eleanor watched the crumpled pile of money. For the first time in a decade, she felt entirely outmaneuvered. Not by capital, by pure, unyielding character. Elias stood. He hoisted Lily down from the booth. He draped his jacket over his arm. Say goodbye, Lily, he instructed gently. Lily grabbed her one-eared rabbit. She waved a sticky hand at Eleanor. Bye-bye, gray cloud lady. Thank you for sharing. Eleanor swallowed the dry knot forming in her throat. She offered a small, hesitant wave back. Goodbye, Lily. Elias offered a singular nod, a gesture of profound, mutual respect. He turned and guided his daughter toward the heavy brass doors, stepping out of the lavender-scented air and back into the biting cold of the city night. Eleanor sat alone. The jazz played. The chandeliers glittered. But the silence returning to her table felt infinitely heavier. She looked down. Next to her untouched wine glass resting beside the stack of worn quarters lay a small crumpled paper napkin, a smiley face drawn in blue crayon. She traced the crude ink lines. The gray clouds receded just a fraction, letting a narrow sliver of light bleed through. The illusion of Laura evaporated long before dawn. Reality did not knock. It kicked the door off its hinges. Elias woke to the familiar hollow hiss of the apartment radiator spitting out lukewarm air. He walked into the cramped hallway. A bright yellow slip of paper lay face down on the welcome mat pushed beneath the doorframe during the night. He picked it up. 3 bold black words bled through the cheap paper notice to vacate. 5 days. He folded the notice. Once. Twice. He pressed it flat and shoved it deep into the inner pocket of his denim jacket. It sat against his chest, a block of ice, radiating a slow, paralyzing dread. He carried Lily out to the curb. The city was still bathed in the gray, bruised light of early morning. The cold autumn rain fell in steady, diagonal sheets. His 1998 pickup truck sat under the weeping willow of a broken street lamp. Rust devoured the wheel wells. The front bumper hung at a permanent crooked angle. Elias buckled Lily into the passenger seat. She wore 3 layers of mismatched sweaters. She clutched her one-eared rabbit in one hand and the crumpled blue crayon napkin from the restaurant in the other. He turned the key. The starter ground its metal teeth. A dry, agonizing mechanical cough echoed down the empty street. Elias pumped the gas pedal twice. He held his breath. The engine caught roaring to life with a thick, choking plume of gray exhaust. He shifted into gear. The wiper blades, stripped of their rubber edges, scraped rhythmic, agonizing arcs into the glass. The heater blew cold air across Elias's knuckles. He navigated the slick, rain-swept streets, heading toward the daycare center on the other side of the industrial district. He mapped out the day in his head. Drop Lily off. Drive to the scrapyard. Sell the copper wire. Beg the landlord for a 2-week extension. Find a day labor crew needing extra muscle. They made it halfway across the suspension bridge. The rhythmic hum of the engine fractured. A heavy metallic clank echoed from beneath the floorboards. The steering wheel jerked violently against Elias's grip. The dashboard lit up a constellation of warning lights, flashing blinding red and amber. Power steering vanished instantly. The truck transformed into a 2-ton block of dead moving iron. Elias muscled the steering wheel, forcing the dying vehicle toward the narrow concrete shoulder. The tires scraped against the barrier. Thick white smoke billowed from the edges of the hood, carrying the acrid stench of scorched oil and melting plastic. He killed the ignition. The silence inside the cab was deafening, broken only by the relentless drumming of the rain against the metal roof. Elias gripped the steering wheel. His knuckles turned bone white. He recognized the sound. A cracked engine block. Fatal. The truck was his lifeline. It hauled the scrap metal. It carried him to the erratic plumbing and construction gigs that paid in cash. Without it, the fragile geometry of their survival collapsed entirely. The eviction notice in his pocket burned a hole through his jacket. A tremor started in his hands, a slow, creeping fracture in his foundation. The walls of the cab closed in. He leaned his forehead against the cold, worn plastic of the steering wheel. The mountain he carried on his back doubled in weight, pressing his face into the dirt. He closed his eyes. He allowed himself 3 seconds of total surrender. 1, 2, 3. Daddy. A small hand tugged at his flannel sleeve. Elias opened his eyes. He turned his head. Lily stared at him, her wide eyes reflecting the flashing hazard lights of the passing cars. She held up the crumpled napkin. "Did the gray clouds get you?" she whispered. Elias stared at the crude, smiley face. He inhaled. He forced the air deep into his burning lungs, pushing the panic down into the dark tomb inside his chest. He smoothed the worry lines forming between her delicate eyebrows. "No bug," Elias said. His voice was a steady, immovable anchor. "Just a little detour. Looks like the old girl needs a long nap." He stripped off his heavy denim jacket. He leaned over and wrapped it around Lily's shoulders, cocooning her against the damp chill. The jacket swallowed her small frame. "We are going to walk the rest of the way," Elias announced, injecting a false bright energy into his tone. "Like explorers." He pushed his door open. The freezing rain soaked through his thin flannel shirt in seconds. He walked around the smoking hood. He opened the passenger door, unbuckled the belts, and hoisted Lily onto his broad shoulders. She giggled, grabbing handfuls of his wet hair. Elias locked the dead truck. He turned his back on the only asset he owned. He stepped onto the narrow pedestrian walkway of the bridge. Cars sped past, spraying arcs of gray slush against his jeans. Horns blared in the morning rush. He did not flinch. He did not look down. He walked with measured, deliberate strides through the freezing storm, a solitary titan carrying his entire universe on his shoulders. The Sterling Tower pierced the weeping sky, a jagged tooth of dark glass and polished steel. Elias bypassed the revolving doors of the grand lobby. Men of his station did not walk across Italian marble. They entered through the concrete jaws of the loading dock. The dispatcher handed him a red plastic badge. Day laborer, expendable muscle. Elias descended into the mechanical bowels of the skyscraper. Sub-level 4. The air down here tasted of copper stagnant water and raw ozone. A massive primary cooling main had ruptured, vomiting, freezing sludgy water across the concrete floor. The regular maintenance crew stood on the raised metal catwalks, their arms crossed, unwilling to wade into the mess. They needed a proxy. A man desperate enough to dive into the filth for a cash envelope. Elias stepped off the bottom stair. The freezing water instantly swallowed his duct-taped boots, seeping some through the cracked leather and biting into his toes. He did not flinch. He waded through the knee-deep sludge toward the central control matrix. He hoisted a heavy industrial pipe wrench over his shoulder. The metal bruised his collarbone. Every step dragged. The cold gnawed at his joints, waking the dull aches he carried from 1,000 previous jobs. He reached the ruptured valve. He knelt. The freezing water soaked through his denim jeans, rising to his waist. He positioned the heavy iron teeth of the wrench around the rusted collar of the pipe. He planted his boots against the concrete. He coiled his back, his muscles drawing tight like thick steel cables. Footsteps rang out on the grating above. Vance, the chief facilities director, marched along the catwalk. He wore a pristine white hard hat and a high-visibility vest that had never touched a drop of grease. He carried a clipboard like a royal scepter. He stopped directly above Elias. He stared down at the murky water, his nose crinkling in disgust. "Hey, temp!" Vance barked. The sound echoed off the damp concrete walls, sharp and demeaning. Elias kept his grip on the wrench. He pushed. The rusted threads screamed against the pressure. "I said look at me when I address you," Vance snapped, kicking the metal railing with the toe of his immaculate boot. Elias paused. He wiped a streak of oily water from his forehead with the back of his wrist. He tilted his head back. Vance sneered. He let his gaze drag over Elias's soaked, frayed flannel shirt and the silver duct tape peeling away from his boots. A master evaluating a defective pack mule. "They scrape you off a street corner. You're moving like molasses down there. We are losing $10,000 an hour while you play in the puddle. Turn the damn wrench." On the catwalk, the other workers shifted their weight. They stared at their phones. They examined their fingernails. No one offered a word of defense. Survival in this building dictated total blindness to the cruelty occurring above them. "You want the hourly rate, you earn it." Vance spat, his voice dripping with condescension. "Though looking at your footwear, I doubt you know what an honest day's wage looks like. Try not to bleed in the water. It clogs the filters." Vance kicked a discarded grease-caked rag over the edge of the grating. It fluttered down and landed with a wet, heavy slap against Elias's shoulder. Black sludge smeared across his wet shirt. "Wipe the threading before you torque it," Vance ordered. "I don't need street trash ruining a $50,000 valve." The rag slid down Elias's arm and splashed into the murky water. The air in his lungs turned to ash. A primal searing heat ignited in his chest. His heavy hands were raw and shivering from the ice water, gripped the handle of the pipe wrench. He calculated the distance to the metal stairs. He pictured his oil-stained hands gripping Vance's crisp collar. He visualized pulling the director over the railing, dragging him down into the freezing, filthy reality of the sub-basement. It would take less than 10 seconds to shatter the man's arrogant glass jaw. He tasted the familiar metallic tang of adrenaline. The beast inside his ribcage clawed at the walls, begging to be let out. Then he felt the heavy, wet lump in his breast pocket. The eviction notice. The ghost of his broken truck waiting on the bridge. The image of Lily sitting at a small plastic table, wearing 3 sweaters, holding a crumpled napkin with a blue crayon smiley face. Elias closed his eyes. He shoved the beast back into the dark. He buried his pride beneath a mountain of necessity. He opened his eyes. He did not scowl. He did not speak a single word of defiance. He reached into the freezing water, retrieved the soaked rag, and scrubbed the rusted threads of the pipe. He locked the wrench back onto the collar. He pulled with every ounce of strength left in his shivering frame. The metal groaned, yielded, and turned. The deafening roar of the leaking water choked, then died completely. He secured the line. The physical labor exhausted his body, but the silence, the heavy, suffocating silence he forced upon himself, shattered his spirit. He traded his dignity to keep the cold away from his daughter. He tightened the valve one final time, waiting in the shadows. The heavy iron wheel locked into place. Elias rested his forehead against the freezing condensation-slicked pipe. The deafening roar of escaping water died, leaving only the hollow echo of drips falling into the flooded pit. His flannel shirt clung to his skin like a sheet of ice. His muscles burned, screaming for oxygen. He had stopped the hemorrhage. The building was safe. He uncoiled his spine and stood up, water sloshing around his thighs. Up on the catwalk, Vance checked his gold wristwatch. He clicked his ballpoint pen. "Took you long enough," Vance muttered, scribbling a note on his clipboard. "Climb out of there and use the service stairs. I don't want you tracking that toxic sludge through the freight elevators. You can pick up your day rate from the basement clerk." Elias did not look up. He waded toward the rusted iron rungs bolted to the concrete wall. He gripped the lowest bar. A sharp, metallic click echoed through the cavernous sub-basement. Then another, a rhythmic, measured cadence, striking the steel grating. The sound did not belong down here among the grease and the ozone. It was the sound of polished marble floors and silent boardrooms. The maintenance crew standing on the catwalk parted. They pressed their backs against the handrails, lowering their heads. Vance turned. The sneer dissolved from his face, replaced by a pale, breathless panic. He snapped his spine straight. He tucked the clipboard under his arm and smoothed the lapels of his high-visibility vest. Eleanor Sterling stepped into the dim fluorescent light of sub-level 4. She wore a camel cashmere trench coat over a tailored black suit. The hem of her coat hovered an inch above the grimy steel grate. She did not pinch her nose against the smell of stagnant water. She walked with the deliberate, unhurried pace of a predator entering a familiar hunting ground. She reached the railing directly above the flooded pit. "Miss Sterling." Vance breathed out, stepping forward. His voice pitched an octave higher. "You did not need to come down to the mechanical levels. I have the situation entirely contained. A minor rupture. I had to properly motivate one of the day laborers to handle the patch, but the matrix is secure." Eleanor did not look at Vance. She rested her manicured hands on the yellow steel railing. She looked down into the dark water. She saw the broad, shivering shoulders draped in soaked flannel. She saw the bruised knuckles gripping the rusted iron rung. She saw the black duct tape peeling away from the waterlogged work boots. Elias paused on the ladder. He tilted his head back. Their eyes met through the dim, cold air. Eleanor's breath hitched. A microscopic pause. The architecture of the man in the pit perfectly matched the man who had occupied her sapphire velvet booth. The man who folded $68 onto a white tablecloth with untainted dignity. She looked at the black, oily sludge smeared across Elias's shoulder. She tracked the trajectory of the stain up to the catwalk, landing on the discarded rag near Vance's immaculate boots. The temperature in the sub-basement plummeted. It had nothing to do with the ruptured cooling line. Eleanor finally turned her head. She fixed her gaze on Vance. Her eyes held the precise, lethal chill of dry ice. "You motivated him," Eleanor repeated. Her voice did not echo. It commanded the air, forcing every man in the room to stop breathing. Vance swallowed. A bead of sweat formed at his hairline. "Yes, ma'am. These street hires, they require a firm hand to maintain our operational standards." "Your operational standards," Eleanor stated, stepping 1 inch closer to the director. "I'm looking at a man standing waist deep in freezing contaminated water, saving this tower tens of thousands of dollars in foundational damage. Meanwhile, I am looking at a facilities director whose boots carry not a single drop of mud." Vance opened his mouth. No sound emerged. "You threw a grease rag at him," Eleanor said. It was not a question. She read the scene with the clinical precision of a coroner. "Ma'am, he was moving too slow. I was simply..." "Quiet." The word severed his defense in half. Eleanor did not raise her volume. She weaponized the silence. Leadership dictates that you do not ask a man to bleed in a trench you are unwilling to step into yourself. Eleanor pronounced her tone, razor thin. You do not build standards. You hide behind a clipboard and exploit the desperate. You are a liability to the culture of my company. Vance's posture crumbled. The clipboard slipped from his arm, clattering onto the steel grate. Miss Sterling, I have 10 years of tenure in this department. You had 10 years, Eleanor corrected. She broke eye contact, dismissing his entire existence. Leave your hard hat and your security badge on the railing. Use the service stairs on your way out. You do not belong in the freight elevators. Vance stood paralyzed. A deflated tyrant stripped of his kingdom in under 60 seconds. He unclipped his badge with trembling fingers. He dropped it next to his white helmet and walked away, shrinking into the shadows of the corridor. The remaining workers stared at the floor, terrified to move. Eleanor turned her attention back to the flooded pit. Elias had climbed 2 rungs higher. The water dripped from his jeans. He did not smile. He did not gloat over the execution he just witnessed. He maintained the exact same stoic, unbroken composure he wore at the restaurant. Eleanor leaned slightly over the railing. Floor 80, she instructed, her voice softening, carrying a note meant only for him. Take my private elevator. Do not bother changing your boots. The brushed steel doors of the private elevator slid shut, sealing Elias inside a silent, ascending vault. The hum of the sub-basement vanished. Classical music, barely a whisper, replaced the roar of ruptured pipes. He watched the digital numbers climb the sleek panel. 10, 30, 60. A vertical launch out of the abyss. Puddles of grimy, rust-tinted water pooled around his duct-taped boots, staining the pristine cream carpet. He shivered. The adrenaline drained from his muscles, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. His reflection in the polished, mirrored walls stared back a drowned man trespassing in the glass castle. Yet his spine remained straight. He carried the ghost of the morning's eviction notice in his damp pocket, but the heavy, suffocating dread had fractured. The elevator chimed softly. 80. The doors parted, revealing a sanctuary suspended in the clouds. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a sprawling, rain-swept metropolis. The gray storm clouds rolled beneath them, conquered by altitude. The office smelled of old paper leather and faint lavender. No secretaries, no buzzing phones, just an island of deliberate quiet. Eleanor stood by a heavy oak desk. She had discarded the camel trench coat. A folded stack of clothes, a thick gray wool sweater, and dark cotton trousers rested on the edge of a leather sofa, alongside a thick white bath towel. The private washroom is through that oak door, Eleanor said, gesturing with a tilt of her head. She did not offer a patronizing smile. She offered basic functional dignity. Hot water. Take your time. Elias nodded. He did not utter a hollow thank you. He accepted the truce. The hot water scalded his frozen skin, melting the grease, the rust, and the accumulated grime of 100 invisible labors. He scrubbed his knuckles until they bled pink. He changed into the dry clothes. The wool felt heavy, smelling faintly of cedar. It warmed the lingering chill buried in his marrow. He stepped back into the vast office. Eleanor sat in a low armchair holding 2 porcelain mugs of black coffee. Steam curled into the conditioned air. She nudged one mug across the glass coffee table. Elias sat on the edge of the sofa. He wrapped his calloused hands around the warm porcelain. The silence stretched between them, thick and comfortable. A rare currency neither knew how to spend. You understand the mechanics of my building better than the man I paid to oversee it? Eleanor observed, taking a slow sip. Her eyes mapped the exhaustion etched around his jaw. You diagnosed a pressurized matrix failure while submerged in freezing sludge. You did it without consulting a manual. Water finds the weakest joint, Elias replied, his voice a low, rough rasp. You learn to listen to the pipes. They tell you where they hurt. Eleanor set her mug down. People are much the same. She leaned forward, bridging the physical gap between them. I employ an army of executives who hide their incompetence behind tailored suits and spreadsheets. I am surrounded by noise, Elias. Endless, deafening noise. But you operate in the quiet. You endure. You build fortresses out of scraps to protect what matters. Elias looked down at his hands. The wool sweater warmed his chest, but the chill of the morning remained anchored in his mind. He reached into the damp pocket of his discarded denim jacket resting on the floor. He pulled out the folded yellow slip of paper. He slid it across the glass table. The eviction notice. A brutal, naked admission of his reality. Next to it, he placed the heavy brass key to his dead pickup truck. I fixed broken things, Elias stated, meeting her gaze. The pride in his eyes remained entirely intact. But today the math beat me. My truck died on the suspension bridge. I have 5 days to pack my daughter's life into cardboard boxes. I am a man balancing on a wire, Eleanor. I do not have the luxury of pride anymore. But I will not accept pity. Eleanor studied the yellow paper. She did not express shock. She traced the jagged edge of the brass key. Pity is an insult to your resilience. She countered her tone, sharp, clearing the air of any sentimentality. I am a businesswoman. I recognize an undervalued asset. The chief engineer of this tower requires an analytical mind, an unbreakable work ethic, and the courage to step into the trench. Vance possessed none of these. You possess all three. She opened a drawer in the glass table. She withdrew a heavy brass master key card bearing the Sterling Tower crest. She placed it beside his rusted truck key. The position comes with a salary that reflects the gravity of the work, Eleanor continued. It also includes a residence suite on the 10th floor meant for emergency personnel. 2 bedrooms, south-facing windows. I suggest you move in tomorrow. Elias stared at the brass key card. The math shifted. The impossible equation of his survival dissolved, replaced by a solid, unshakable foundation. The mountain he carried on his back for 5 years cracked, crumbling into dust. He looked up at Eleanor. The armor she wore to conquer the city had vanished, revealing a profound, quiet grace. Why? Elias asked. A single, heavy syllable. Because Lily asked me if she could sit with me, Eleanor answered softly. She saw a woman drowning in a very large, very empty room. She threw a lifeline. I'm simply returning the favor. Elias reached out. His scarred, heavy fingers closed around the brass key card. The metal felt warm. I finished my shift at 5, he said. The rain had stopped by late afternoon. The sky broke spilling bruised purple and gold light across the slick pavement. Elias walked through the glass doors of the daycare center. He did not wear soaked flannel. He wore a heavy wool sweater. Beside him walked Eleanor Sterling. Her dark coat swept against the floor. The daycare workers paused, their eyes widening at the formidable presence commanding the small, brightly colored room. Lily sat at a plastic table coloring a drawing of a lopsided castle. She looked up. Her eyes widened. The missing tooth smile illuminated the room. "Daddy!" she squealed, dropping the crayon. She launched herself forward. Elias caught her, hoisting her high into the air. He buried his face in her curls, inhaling the scent of cheap baby shampoo. The weight of her small body anchored him to the earth. "You brought the gray cloud lady," Lily announced, pointing a dimpled finger at Eleanor. Eleanor crouched down, bringing herself eye level with the 5-year-old girl. The harsh lines of the corporate titan melted away entirely. She offered a soft, genuine smile. "The clouds are gone, Lily," Eleanor whispered. "Your father chased them away." Lily tilted her head. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the threadbare rabbit. She held it out to Eleanor. "You can hold Mr. Hops. He helps when you feel lonely." Eleanor accepted the worn toy. Her fingers traced the missing ear. A tear, rare and silent, slipped down her cheek, instantly brushed away by the cuff of her coat. She stood up. Elias shifted Lily to his left hip. He extended his right hand toward Eleanor. A bridge built across two vastly different worlds. Eleanor looked at his broad, calloused hand. She reached out and intertwined her manicured fingers with his. Her grip was firm, unyielding. Together they pushed the doors open. They stepped out into the clearing evening. The city hummed around them, no longer a labyrinth of locked doors and cold indifference, but a vast, open landscape waiting to be lived in. 3 figures walking side by side down the wet pavement, stepping out of the shadows and moving toward the warmth of a lit window. Thank you for walking this journey with us here on Quiet Dad Stories. Elias navigated the fire of humiliation, not with his fists, but with a silent, unbreakable resilience. He built a wall out of his own endurance to protect his daughter's innocence. He swallowed his pride so she could keep her smile. But let me ask you this. Do you believe it takes more strength to strike back when the world insults you, or to stand entirely still and absorb the blow for the sake of someone you love? Have you ever had to bury your own dignity to shield a child from the cold reality of society? Drop down into the comments and share your perspective. We read every single one of your stories. If Elias's quiet sacrifice resonated with you today, please leave a like to help this story reach others. Consider subscribing and tapping the small bell icon so you never miss our next chapter. Until next time, keep your head high, protect your peace, and remember that sometimes the greatest kings wear faded denim.